folks know that the department and this board for a while now have focused on language interpretation for limited English proficient families and how crucial communication is, especially now during the pandemic. And we've created this project that's been ongoing that Russell and his team and Dr. Vasquez and his team are going to talk about in some detail. So, Russell Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner. As always, very pleased to be with you here today. We are going to explain to you a project that we have that my colleague Lauren Wu is overseeing and how it is playing out, particularly in communities across the state. And we wanted Dr. Vázquez Matos to come today to speak about the experience in Holyoke. And really what I want the board to take away with is just the understanding that because of the pandemic, our department has to adjust its expenditures, its resources, its priorities. And where we know that there are families that struggle right now to access the information that the schools need to provide about how to involve their children in online learning, how to access materials from places like Google Classroom, the need is great. The need for language access is great because particularly where that information, if it's being provided in one language only, is not able to reach all of our families the way that it needs to. And so what we've done here at DESE is to use data, and Lauren will explain more about how we've done that, to identify the communities that are in greatest need, and we've made sure that we have invested to address that need. In fact, we planned to spend $500,000 this year to expand language access, interpretation, and translation in these districts where the need is most critical. And then, after Lauren actually has that chance to explain the project and how we have the undertaking that we have prioritized for ourselves, what I really want you to hear from the Holyoke team, and really pleased to present our new receiver for the first time to this board, is really how they have been able to take this initiative from DESE and make it a part of a much larger district-wide strategy around parent engagement. And so how do you kind of take a DESE initiative and frankly make it your own? That's what we want districts to do. We want them to we are presenting an opportunity, but in Holyoke, this is not a standalone initiative. They didn't sort of take this and make it the family engagement piece. Family engagement is much larger than this in Holyoke, and I'm really pleased for Dr. Vázquez Matos and his team to tell you more about that. So, Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll go to the Holyoke team, and Dr. Vázquez Matos will have a chance to introduce Mr. Magnolia as well. So, thanks very much.
Thanks, Russell. So I'm excited to be here today to update you on the work of the Language Interpretation Services Project. My name is Lauren Wu. I'm the Director of the Office of Strategic Transformation here at DESE. But before I begin, I would be remiss not to mention my colleague, Deb Lantain, who's been a critical teammate in getting this project off the ground and running. So the Language Interpreter Services Project was started to provide direct support to schools and districts, and most importantly, to families. Given the complexities of school reopening this year, and after receiving some feedback from the spring, we wanted to make sure that language access wasn't a barrier to learning. Therefore, this project supports districts in establishing ongoing two-way communication with limited English proficient families. It expands the district's capacity to use interpretation services to engage and teach students, and it supports the development of a district's own cadre of trained interpreters. We selected 21 districts to participate in this project. We used 3 factors in determining district participation. So the percentage of duly identified students, so those students that identify both Ls and students with disabilities, English learners and students with disabilities. Percentage of students whose first language was not English, and the percentage of high-need students. And so you can see here on the chart the 21 districts that are participating broken out by their assistance region. So what exactly is this project? It's 2 services that provide direct support. The first is a contract with Bridge. It is a on-demand telephonic interpretation service. Each district has been given a unique code and a specific amount of funding to use towards this contract. Districts and schools are encouraged to use this service for any type of communication with limited English proficient families. So whether for special education IEP meetings, parent-teacher conferences, communicating about reopening activities and direct instruction. There's no limit to how this service can be used, and we're really encouraging districts to think outside of the box when utilizing this service. The second project we launched was actually stemmed from the great work that started in Holyoke last year with which is the Interpreter and Translator in Education Training Workshop Series through the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the Translation Center. This workshop is a 7-part 21-hour series to train bilingual in-district staff on the standards and procedures of translation and interpretation. Our goal is to make sure that each of the participating districts has at least 2 trained interpreters to be able to provide high-quality translation and interpretation services to really build the capacity of the in-district staff. So far, we have 64 participants across the 21 districts participating this fall. As part of the project, the districts participated in a webinar designed to train them on this service, as well as helping them improve language accessibility in their own district. They're also being invited to participate in a family engagement workshop series this fall, offered through our Office of Student and Family Support. To maximize this service, we ask participants to message this offering to their key stakeholders, in particular their teachers, and every household where the language is not English at home. We hope that this service serves really as a tool for families to advocate for themselves when needing access to language, so that, again, that language access is never a barrier to learning. Finally, through a series of videos that we're creating with UMass, we are educating staff, parents, and guardians, and students on the importance of interpretation, as well as the role of the interpreter. So I'm going to kick it to Dr. V and Nicholas Magnolia, who's going to elaborate on this work in Holyoke, and I'd be happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning. Buenos dias. Again, my name is Alberto Vázquez Matos, proud receiver superintendent of Holyoke Public Schools, and with me is my colleague, Nicholas Magnolia, who is the the manager of interpretation and translation for the district. And I want to start my presentation basically kind of grounding us on what our work is focused on. And this is kind of a set of values that guide our work every single day, where we encourage, explore, engage, and embrace and empower our students and families throughout the district, and making sure that all students who participate in our educational program in Holyoke receives a quality educational program. And this year, we continue to build upon the work that was done last year around implementing truly interpretation and translation services for our families. So in 2017, the main scope of the Emerging Language Access Systems was focused on bottom half of the circle in family and community engagement by providing high-quality translation and interpretation services and professional culture by developing a training program to bring our Tier 3 staff up to Tier 2. By 2020, despite the unique challenges of switching to remote learning at the end of the school year, the systems put in place for language access have grown roots and reinforced the way the district perceives the role of language access and its management and operations. Annual surveys and professional development have been implemented system-wide for school and district staff. In fact, we have one this evening for district administration. Now the language access has been integrated into the first 3 slices, and we can see the highest purpose of this work to support instructional leadership. Schools must benefit from a strong culture of language access and equity in the district in order for parents and guardians to participate meaningfully. The synergy of all of this work, what we call our strategic priorities, is part of what makes us unique at Holyoke, because one cannot live without the other. And it's always grounded in our role of excellence through equity. And so, our why. We have since the beginning of this work, our work is grounded on the experiences of our families and how we can should our work, resources, and expectation to support all our family, especially in the areas of language access. And it allowed me, as the new incoming receiver, to build upon the great work that already has happened and create documents and roadmaps and action plans such as the principles of interpretation and translation, and really making sure that this actually embraces the context of Holyoke Public Schools, knowing that 80% of our students in Holyoke are Hispanic, and not enough district materials were available and now have become more readily available in Spanish or their target language. And 44% of our students live in homes where English isn't their primary language, and interpreters were not possibly available to them until now, and it was starting this work last year. And knowing myself, considering myself an L student, having the availability and access to these services is very important. So what does the work look like? In conducting a family language preference survey, which is online and is used to is updated using School Brains every year, Rebecca Lamb, our enrollment manager, in collaboration with Nicholas, the district translator interpreter, has put this entirely online in English and Spanish in all languages for limited diffusion currently represented in the district. We've also revamped our homepage, and the HPS homepage has a translation and interpretation page available in Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Haitian, Creole, Arabic, and Swahili. And the page contains a poster and family feedback form, all translated by professional linguists, not a machine. We've developed intentional and meaningful system-wide training. One, translator and interpreter in education training workshop series in partnership with the University of Massachusetts Translation Center. Another training for Tier 3 by Tier 1, which we are defining those dates. And 3, training for cabinet and district spec around language access best practices and survey results. Again, that training is happening today at 4. And now I'll ask my colleague, Nicholas, to kind of walk us through this slide.
Right. All right, so what have we built on? We have a new cohort of Tier 2 interpreters, all enrolled in the UMass training. Same number as previous years. We have 25 participants. That brings the number of trained staff up to about 75. These are all staff who were identified by their school leaders as having significant linguistic and cultural abilities, but lacking training in interpretation and translation. Anybody who doesn't take this training, we consider Tier 3, and when you take the course, you become Tier 2. So there's that motivation. We have a centralized directory, so we're keeping track of everybody who's being trained, their names, their titles, the languages they're working in, the year of their training, and we're also keeping track of when they were doing their professional development, which is offered to all Tier 2s. So when the training is over, it doesn't just end, the conversation continues so that we can build a network of trained people across schools. Tier 3 training, that will be done by me. It was interrupted this past school year, but it will be done this school year. And it will be basically reaching out to everybody who were identified by their school leaders, but not necessarily in the position to be able to translate or interpret as such. The way we have it organized now, it's family connectors and family engagement coordinators who are really needing to be those intermediaries. Bilingual teachers and bilingual paraprofessionals, we're not necessarily asking to leave their posts and go interpret or translate, but the ones that have linguistic and cultural skills, we want them to know about how to access language access services and just know the basics, how to work with an interpreter, when should you call one. And as far as what we're building on for two-way family communication, That is really tied up in the training, so that we have the people at the schools who are able to mediate those conversations, as well as leveraging the line bridge services. Having a telephonic service that allows family to school communication and not just school to family is ideal and preferable, and it's working for us. Promoting family advocacy for translation and interpretation among parents. We're doing this with the parent advisory councils. We're also forming work groups with parent volunteers and school leaders who have taken this training, combination of tier 1, 2, and 3, to really target the needs so that we can come up with good questions for our parent survey that will be held in the middle of the school year. That's it for my part for this slide.
I think one important metrics here is our centralized directory currently has 175 tier translators, interpreters district-wide available to all schools and families. So there is a directory, and that number actually will increase by the end of this academic year. And so, as we continue to monitor this work and build upon this important work around language access for our families, it's important. We know that we went from a time of implementation and compliance to now a meaningful commitment district-wide as we are informing families, stakeholders, district leaders, principals, and so forth, and getting to a place where it is part of the way of work, and equity drives this work and process improvement. What areas can we continue to build upon? And so this allows us to empower families to be our educational partners in the journey of their children. It is about eliminating the equity barriers, such as access to information and services, and make it available in their native language. And most importantly, it is aligned to our strategic operating plan around being an anti-racist district that is culture responsive to the community it serves. And so, as part of this work, and Nick mentioned this, we will continue to assess and conduct surveys with our families and stakeholders regarding their experience with interpretation and translation, and what can we do better. The parties will work together to develop one or more of these methods, gathered input from parent groups such as the LPAC, our English Language Parent Advisory, our Special Education Parent Advisory groups, and we'll make this, our district, a final determination around a document that we can continue to modify and making sure that it meets the needs of our families. And here in the appendix are some examples that you can actually click on the link and see videos that we do weekly for our families, both in English and Spanish, on important questions and information, the survey's results, samples of the Facebook Live that I conduct every other week in English and Spanish for our families, so that there is this two-way communication happening and it's ongoing, as well as the Principles and Procedures document, which is the guiding document of the work that we continue to build upon.
Thank you so much. Russell, did you have any other further comments?
No, I just want to say thank you, and I thought that was really just a great example of how the DESI initiative is just accelerating an overall district strategy. So thank you.
Before we get into questions, I just had a question, Russell. How scalable do you think this is, or is it too early to tell?
You know, I think that we think in terms of tiers as well, but the tiers are kind of reversed for us. So there's sort of the tier 1 is universal, tier 2 is targeted, and tier 3 is intensive. So we have, really wanted to invest where the need is the greatest, thinking about, the funding that we're spending right now is really going to where, as Lauren said, we know the needs are the greatest and where we need to invest the most. But we're also making other services and supports available universally to all districts. So, for example, we're developing additional information right now for districts on supporting students who are both duly identified as English learners and students with disabilities. We're developing a web page that's available with family resources to support families of children who are English learners and who are also students with disabilities. So really just trying to make sure that we have information universally available to districts around the expectations for family engagement in interpretation and translation, as well as guidance on supporting students that involves families in that process, and then thinking about how we continue to expand this project to reach more districts as possible. So in my mind, it's a full thing. We keep up with the intensive, but we make sure we take the ideas and learnings that we have from our from our interactions with districts to make those ideas universally available for all districts.
Thank you. And nice to meet you, Dr. Vasquez. I'll open it up to the membership. Any comments? Member Fernandez?
Buenos días. Gracias por la presentación. It was, I'm really encouraged to see and hear more about this really important work that you all are doing. I particularly, again, what perked my ears was the work that you're doing to make sure that you have professional translators. You're not using a Google Translate on a website. As we know that that's a barrier for families in terms of the investment that a district might be making in their families. So thank you for this really interesting work that is going on, not only in Holyoke, but also in other districts. So thanks for shedding light on this to the staff. I'm hoping that as you explore other districts, that we're paying attention, and I did see on the list that you do have most of the districts covered that have over 40% Latino student population in particular, and we know that those 14 are also some of the highest needs. So I'd love to see just increased focus on some of those and hear more as this work progresses, because I do think it'll make a big difference. And then I'm wondering sort of how far along this pathway Holyoke is relative to other districts and what you're able to share with other districts in their journey, and what your thoughts are on that.
So as I mentioned, being able, I think the experience in Holyoke has actually informed a lot of this work, and this idea of building a cadre of interpreters, trained interpreters within districts, and having a tiered model of who's more qualified and more adept at training, more expert, versus those who you can use more incidentally, but not in situations where a higher level of translation interpretation is needed, like an IEP meeting, definitely comes out of the ongoing interactions that we've had with Holyoke over the past many years. And I really appreciate how the district intends to take that even further. And so I know that we will continue to draw on those ideas to share them with other districts, because as Lauren and I are interacting with districts and supporting the training model with UMass Amherst, we're making sure that we're using the same language about this is what this is in service of. Who are you now creating within your district who can provide these interpretation and translation services? And I think we intend to continue to work across this agency to build out that type of thinking for all districts in the state. But I'm sure that there'll be more opportunities as well for the Holyoke team to share out with other districts. But I don't know if anything comes to mind immediately in terms of your, being very new to the job as well, and the focus being so much on Holyoke right now. It might be early yet, but please.
Sure. So I think one of the things actually, having an opportunity to share best practices with my colleagues throughout the state, and I think one of the things, being bilingual and biliterate, and understanding the context of and let's say from a Latino perspective, coming into a district, is making sure that we can eliminate the obstacles and challenges as it relates to how families navigate a public school system that can be so overwhelming and so complex. So a good example that I've shared with colleagues actually in their neighboring district is in revamping the website. And please take a moment when you have time to check our website. Is how to access this virtual remote learning from the simplest thing of how to turn on a Chromebook to who do I call? And so we have created a resource page for families that can navigate that is user-friendly, accessible both in English and in Spanish, but also making sure that the person that they're going to contact for further question also has the ability to be able to speak in two languages to be able to support the families. And so we're being very intentional, this is why the training is happening this afternoon, that every division in the district has to be aware of this work. From anything from signage that needs to be posted throughout the school to how do we actually answer the phone for our families as it relates to being at service for our community. All of that needs to be part of the DNA of the work for the district, and of course, build upon that. So finding the opportunity to share those best practices, we'll be more than happy to keep to find those opportunities.
Member West first. Sorry about that, Marty.
Oh, no problem.
Great. Well, thank you all for the presentation. A question for you, Dr. B, which is, how much diversity is there in the language that is spoke among the non-English speaking households in Holyoke? So is it predominantly Spanish speaking, as I understand it? And that's my recollection from the recently concluded litigation. And I guess the reason I'm asking that is, I wonder how this approach and therefore the way in which the state is supporting districts that look different needs to change or be adaptable to places where there's greater language diversity. So I think both of you could reflect on that a bit.
Sure. So understanding the context of Holyoke, majority of our students are identified as Latinx or Hispanic. Knowing that 40% of our families, English is not their first language at home. So making sure that we as a district become culturally sensitive to that, and how do we actually deliver instruction, understanding the community. So many of our materials are being looked at and making sure that they're culture responsive. But also when we align it to academic strategies. So we're looking at literacy, right? We need, as a district, we are working hard to making sure we change that mindset that language or a student who is new to English as a new language does not mean that they have a cognitive disability. It's a language barrier. And so taking that opportunity and starting when they are young, coming to pre-K, kindergarten, and so forth, and celebrating the fact that they are bilingual, and I always say to them, that's a superpower. How do we build now on making sure those students can actually have high academic vocabulary in both their native language as well as English? And the research is out there that would show that actually students will actually excel their cohorts who are in actually a traditional or English setting. And so we are working even academically of how do we actually strategize that and make it and embed it in our curriculum. But also how do we empower parents to actually understand that and making sure that parents actually can support the work at home, and that it's okay to speak their language, but also read to them in their language at home so that we can build their literacy skills at home as well.
So the workshop series through UMass is language agnostic. And so really the 7-part series is focused on the standards and procedures of translation and interpretation. So the way that it breaks out is that we've asked districts to prioritize their bilingual staff. Some districts have decided to prioritize staff with the high incidence languages in their district. Some districts have decided to rely on their low incidence languages based off of their availability of their staff members. And so the training workshop series starts with the language assessment that identifies whether or not this individual is actually bilingual and can be able to communicate effectively in the language. And then the series focuses on a number of items regarding translation interpretation, like the role of the interpreter, ethics as it relates to interpretation, vocabulary. But then folks are broken up into language-specific groups. where they can then practice with each other. So as we think about translating it to across the statewide, we really are trying to open the scope to be able to involve any language and have a wide depth of information and participants.
I would just quickly add to that too that we don't often talk about the places where we have to learn from and grow in our development of an initiative. And so, in fact, we started this last spring at the beginning of the pandemic. And so Lauren and I worked together on establishing translation and interpretation resources for districts. We started with a smaller number of districts, and we purposely sought out both districts like Holyoke that are predominantly bilingual, and then another district that was more multilingual. And what we really learned from the experience was that we needed to rethink, particularly who our partner was for the translation services. And I think that's why we're so pleased to be working with Lionbridge. It wasn't bad what happened last year. It's just what we have now is much more responsive to any district, and the variety of languages that are spoken across the state is really being addressed well, we think, by Lionbridge. And I know it's something that Dr. Vázquez Matos and I have talked about in terms of not only just the language but also the dialect and the terminology and the vocabulary that is very specific. That needs to be said well and in a parent-friendly way. And we, I think you've attested to me that language is doing that well for your families. That's correct. That's very important for us too.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, was whether the dependence on Lionbridge is greater in places with a more multilingual environment, and whether you see that take up there in the usage data that I assume you see.
We are watching the usage data carefully, and it's still early to make that type of analysis about multilingual versus bilingual, but we are watching it carefully.
Question about Member Moriarty?
Thank you all very much. Great to have you here, Dr. Vasquez Matos. And I just wanted to highlight something that I think is an opportunity here. It's in the third slide that you had presented, where Holyoke, Lawrence, Southbridge, and the Springfield Empowerment Zone were categorized as strategic transformation for the purpose of awarding these resources. I see what you did there. And I think that's a really good rubric for finding those particularly important needs for the communities that are in receivership. And just by way of comparison, at the end of our packet for this meeting, we had our single grant award, which was the From Literacy to Practice Evidence-Based Early Literacy. None of those communities are on that list, which I was somewhat sad to see, but it's a competitive grant, and there's a lot of variables there. But I would love to see a strategic transformation tranche for that kind of work that is so badly needed in those communities, just as this is very badly needed in those communities. So, strategic transformation for awarding competitive grants in Massachusetts, love it. I think it's a model that I picked up here and would like to see happen over and over again.
Thank you. Any questions? I think we can move on. Thank you so much. This presentation is great. Thank you. We look forward to working with you, Doctor.
Thank you. Likewise.